Okay, we're turning to chapter 27, Cubism, Futurism, etc. I'd like to take a look at this artist, actually one of my favorite artists. I know you think I have a lot of favorites, that's because I do. But anyway, this is Marcel Duchamp. And the title of this is Nude Descending a Staircase, number 2. There were multiple versions of this. It actually sort of fits into Cubism, I believe. You'll see it that way, I think, more than any other thing. Futurism, a little bit, but it came to the United States for a special show they called the Armory Show. I think it was 1909, 1913, a long time ago, imagine, for people taking a look at something like this. And it caused a big to-do because people were complaining about it. And it actually was nicknamed Rude Descending a Staircase, that's one I remember. Explosion in the Shingle Factory, I think, became kind of popular, and so on. But it has, it has withstood the test of time. It's, I've parodied this particular painting actually more than once. I have nude Gumby descending a staircase, which I wish I had an image of to show you. Also, in the Mickey Mouse show of a year and a half, 2 years ago, there's a nude Mickey descending a staircase. In any event, I do love parody and humor, and so there you go. Marcel Duchamp was with the Dada movement, which was an anti-art movement, for one thing. He, and you'll see a couple of pieces that fit into that category with him very soon. But Nude Descending a Staircase number 2, I think, is one of the important pieces in certainly my collection of significant art and artists. So we have that, and now this little cartoon, which I have interjected here, which I think is kind of funny. From well, I don't think it's necessarily 1912 that it was drawn, but I love that cartoon. Marcel Duchamp wasn't just a painter, he was a thinker. He was an artistic philosopher, really, and he made famous the ready-made sculpture. This is certainly one. It's called the Fountain. And he simply took a urinal, in case you didn't recognize it, flipped it upside down, signed it R. Mutt, some anonymous artist, and dated it 1917. It's just porcelain with a signature on it. And what he was able to give us was thinking about things in a brand new way, which I think is one of the things artists are supposed to do. Not all of us do, but I think many of us would strive for that. And so he would take an ordinary object and change the context of it. He took it off the wall of a bathroom, perhaps, I don't know, maybe he bought it at Lowe's, I don't know. But he put it on a pedestal and he put it in the context of an art gallery, and he said it's art. And why is it art? Well, because I said it's art. And because it's here in an art gallery and it's on a pedestal, and that's all you need to know. And that still takes some people, this many years later, a while to think about. This is another one of his ready-mades. It is a stool with a bicycle tire on top of it, and it's called Bicycle Wheel. And I think it makes for a pretty interesting piece of sculpture, combining two things that have very different purposes, and now they just have one, an aesthetic purpose. Now, I should have brought this from upstairs because I actually own one of these. It's a Marcel Duchamp piece. Mine isn't signed by him, so it's not, I'm not going to be able to retire and move away with what I get from selling this. I did land upon it in an antique shop in Michigan some years ago and snapped it up. My friends that I was with said, "What is that?" Because they did not know what it was, and what it was and what it is a piece of art. But its original use is a wine bottle rack. You know, the wine bottles would be stacked on here, and so on. And I think it's pretty wonderful, especially when you start thinking about it in design terms. So he's taking us to places that we haven't been before. So let's see, the Nude Descending a Staircase is on 487, and the Fountain is on 499, and I think Bicycle Wheel might be on 499 also, but maybe not, because every once in a while I forget to do something like write down a page number if they're in the book. So check it out, and you'll find it, I believe, in that chapter, chapter 27. Now let's take a look at this piece. The artist has changed, quite obviously. Salvador Dali is the man who painted this. The title of it is Persistence of Memory. If you've taken other classes with me, I've used this a lot for lots of reasons in terms of trying to have people explain what does it mean to you. Dali doesn't necessarily tell us everything about his pieces. And so this one we have to sort of explore on our own. I think it has stood the test of time, that's for sure, and I can't remember the exact year. It was painted 1931, kind of a long time ago. And these melted watches, ants can be, and not necessarily, but can be a symbol of the devil. The ants are on top of that orange, that's a not a stopwatch, it's a pocket watch. Now there's this really creepy sort of thing. It's got a tongue, it's got sort of a nose that's kind of an eyelash thing. People are still trying to figure out what the heck that is. And where does it go? It's a great example of a shape, a morphic shape that just drifts off. You can't tell where it stops, really. The other thing this painting is a good representation of is proportion. So proportion has two concepts. The relationship of the parts to the whole, and also the relationship of the piece as a physical thing. And in fact, and I don't think I have it in front of me because this doesn't give me that information, and I'm sorry at the moment, but Persistence of Memory is quite a small painting. I have to say that Salvador Dali was one of the most prolific artists and detailed. Prolific meaning he painted a lot, pretty amazing. And the more that I've seen of him, the more I have appreciated him. Last spring, I was actually in his home and in his museum in Barcelona, Catalonia, in the northern part of Figueres. This is another, I clicked on the wrong thing. This is another Salvador Dali piece, Premonition of the Civil War with Baked Beans. I don't believe it's in your book, in fact I know it's not, but another very interesting piece. Moving right along, Surrealism. Let's take a look at this one. This artist is Meret Oppenheim. It's on page 10, actually. We're going way back as we were introducing the course in the first place. On page 10 in your textbook, Fur-Covered Cup and Saucer. It fits into Surrealism because what he did was he just covered a spoon and a cup and a bowl with deer hide, and gives us this surreal aspect. I mean, textural and whatever. I mean, can you imagine eating with that spoon or drinking out of that cup? I don't think so. So it's given a whole new feeling and a whole new meaning. That was his intent. Now, also in this chapter is the work of this artist, Alexander Calder, C-A-L-D-E-R. You'll see not this piece, but a similar one on page 507. Alexander Calder invented the mobile. He suspended it from the ceiling, and that had not been done before. And most frequently, they move with the air that moves around them. If you've ever been in the Pittsburgh airport, I hope you've looked up when you get to if you're getting ready to take a flight, in that large lobby where there are shops all around, and McDonald's is over on the left-hand side, look above you and you'll see these large white shapes, paddles, sort of like this, suspended there, and they're moving very gently and very gracefully with the wind that presents them, gives them that movement. There are also giant ones at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. So it's always a good idea when you're in a gallery to not just look down and to the left and the right and straight ahead, but look up. Next, let me see, on page 586, we have, now we do, the work of this sculptor, British sculptor, Henry Moore. Henry Moore's pieces are primarily figurative and very, very abstract, and they generally have a hole, a space in them. Certainly this is no exception to that. They're typically titled Recumbent Woman 1, Recumbent Figure, Recumbent Couple, that sort of thing. Titles are not a big deal with him. They are with some artists. Titles are everything sometimes with me, by the way. With my art, I should say. Here's another. I mean, when you see one Henry Moore, you probably can tell when you see another one. Now, in your we are getting to the point where artists and their work very individualized, so hard to just put into an easy category. This is pure abstraction, and the artist is, how am I going blank on this of all things, Mondrian, a Broadway Boogie Woogie. Sorry about that. Again, when you see one Mondrian, you probably can tell all Mondrians, and a momentary one of those. Anyway, Broadway Boogie Woogie is probably his most known title. The others are just sort of arrangement in blue, red, and black, things like that. And they are, I think they're interesting, especially Broadway Boogie Woogie perhaps, but they're pretty minimal. There's not a lot going on in these paintings, and so they don't really, they matter. They matter a lot in terms of art history and where he and his work fits. They just don't matter a lot to me personally. They don't sing to me too much. Let me see what else I might have here for you. Well, you might, those of you that took art fundamentals with me might remember this. And this is another Mondrian. It doesn't look at all like the ones we've just seen, the more stereotypical ones. But this one is called Tree, and I guess you can probably see the image of a tree here. So it has some representational connection, unlike the other two that we just saw. The interesting thing about this painting is it's one of the few that you could be able to see without having to go very far. It's on display at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. Check it out next time you're there. It's one to see. And oddly, I think in this chapter we have this image. And this is Grant Wood's American Gothic. It's parodied a lot. It's been parodied. There's something down in the gallery that's a parody of this picture. It actually, I even did a parody of this in 1967 when I was a first-year student here. I guess you all remember I went to school here. That was a long time ago. But anyway, it's down in the gallery, and I did some things to it. What I did was I collaged it and put some things that had zeitgeist for the time period on her apron, that's on her dress, and there's an atomic bomb exploding in the background, and there's some stuff going on inside the house that you can see in the window, and it actually it got a lot of attention here, mostly positive, but every once in a while that's not all you can expect. And there's a little cartoon of this too. I guess I like humor. The Doom Channel, bad things are happening, real bad, worse to come, much worse. Well, you know, how about that for today's cartoon? Oh my gosh. All right, let me see what else I need to be showing you from this chapter. We're getting close to the end here, folks, but we're not there yet. I want to point out this artist. This artist, and we just put her in her, and that's another reason I want to show her. We don't have nearly enough women artists represented in any art history text, except ones exclusively devoted to women in art history, which I taught a couple of those courses before. This is Georgia O'Keeffe. And Georgia O'Keeffe painted desert scenes that were from her environment. She also painted lots of large flowers that became kind of controversial. People tried to see sexual things within them, but she always claimed, no, that's not what I'm going for here. That's not what that's about. And my painting students know her well because we study her a little bit, and then we do paintings inspired by her from photographs from actual flowers. This is Morning Glory, and then we have another one called Black Morning Glory, and there it is. Let's see, what else I want to show here. Well, certainly this. Certainly not that. Sorry, guys. I'll teach you to look at the screen first. By the way, this is an artist, female artist, Judy Chicago. She's a ceramic artist, sculptor, and she made, it's called Dinner Party, and she made a large installation of ceramic pieces and she dedicated them to different artists, and she put, things on the dinner plate. This is the one she made in homage to Georgia O'Keeffe. So, I'm glad, even though I didn't mean to show it right now, I'm glad it showed up. What I'm excited to show you is this. Okay, so here's this piece. Talk about controversial. This is Autumn Glory. It's done by Jackson Pollock. Autumn Rhythm, Autumn Glory. That's the thing at Deep Creek. Autumn Rhythm. And so Jackson Pollock, who started off doing very realistic painting and drawing and whatever in art school, started getting wilder and more branched out. And then this whole thing called abstract expressionism came along, and artists were painting not like this anymore, but like they were using large muscles and so on. And they got involved with trying to think about painting what was real. And so artists like Jackson said, well, what's real is the paint and the canvas that it's painted on. So that for him was realism and realistic all at the same time. And it was also abstract expressionism. So he flung the paint and flung it in his studio on the floor. And you have these layers of different colors and values, black, white, and some browns in this one. And you sort of have to be in front of a real one to really get the depth that is sort of created there and to really appreciate it. It's larger than this, which this is pretty large, this image on the wall. And in fact, if you take a look at this, which I think is pretty interesting as we think about proportion, again, these two people can appreciate this in a way that you and I aren't able to. And certainly we're not able to if we just saw that picture in the book. I have an excellent excuse for not putting the page number for Autumn Rhythm by Jackson Pollock into my lecture for you guys today, and that's because this author didn't put it in her book, but she did put white. Oh, here we go. Again, I always want to click on the other image, and there it is. You can see the relationship of that to Jackson Pollock. Actually, this one is just the whole canvas is full of paint splatters, as he would just take his brush out and throw it and twirl it around and carry on. Now, I want to make a point of this. So I have heard ever since I started teaching 42 years ago, teaching art, and that is, well, anybody can do that. Well, that is true, and plenty of people have subsequent to this, but no one had done it before, and no one had actually thought about the fact that if we're going to be real and if we're going to be using paint to be real, then let's just use paint and just pile it up and so on. And so that's why this matters, and one by somebody else is not going to. It's a simple thing, as simple thing as that. I want to show you another artist. These are abstract expressionist artists, by the way, from this chapter. And this image is by Willem de Kooning, D-E-K-O-O-N-I-N-G. Willem de Kooning concentrated images of women, and you can see that they're painted kind of violently. So people had a reaction to this that is very, very demeaning to women, very derogatory, and so on. The more I looked into it, the more I don't know that that was his objective whatsoever. And although I see that kind of interpretation, art can be interpreted in so many different ways. I mean, she obviously isn't pretty. She obviously doesn't seem to be very happy. And you can tell that there was a lot of emotion that was going into how he was putting this image on a canvas. I happen to like his work very much because of its intensity. And so this is, and they're all woman one, woman two, whatever. This happens to be woman one. She looks a little happier than the last one. They have variations one to the other. Unfortunately, and I'll show you in his studio, which I find interesting, with his paintings here. Obviously, he's quite successful. Look at this studio, look at the size of that. Anyway, de Kooning, I think, is an artist that matters a lot. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but the last part of his life, he had severe dementia and a very tragic ending to a brilliant painter's life. Next, we have this artist, and another artist that, isn't for everyone's enjoyment, But certainly for mine, Mark Rothko, R-O-T-H-K-O, is the artist's name. There's an example on 525. He names his paintings pretty much like, yellow and blue and white squares and that sort of thing. I will tell you that you cannot appreciate a Rothko in this book or on the screen. You have to be standing literally in front of one of them. And even better if you get to go to a Rothko show where there are multiples in the same room. Something he does with veils of color is very interesting. And in fact, Rothko has created a Stendhal syndrome on more than one person that has not necessarily studied art. The way he paints and applies the paint does something kind of crazy to some people's wiring in their brains, and it's not unusual for somebody to have an unusual experience of Mark Rothko. In Houston, Texas, there's the Rothko Chapel, which has several of his paintings on the walls. They're really dark paintings. I've been in a meditation space connected to the Manil Gallery, and I can tell you I've sat in there trying to be moved by it more than once. I was moved by the Rothko show I saw, including this painting and this one, but not by the ones in the Rothko Chapel. Here's another one here, and here's another one. A lot of people say, well, who couldn't have done that? And again, the same answer is, well, that was Mark's thing, that's what Mark did, and here he is in his studio. Another artist in this grouping is Rauschenberg. Rauschenberg is an artist who created something called the Combine. And they're essentially two-dimensional pieces that come off the wall with large stuff. This one is certainly a good example of this. Combined junk in many cases that he found, and just uses them as aesthetic objects and arranging them. And of course, in this case, sort of plugging something in that's not going to have any use. It's not like it's going to start moving or lighting up or anything. This one called Monogram is not a combine hanging on the wall. It's actually its own self-standing piece on a pillow with a stuffed rooster on the top of it. That's Rauschenberg, and he's probably going to be around on page 526 in that category. There will be a study guide coming out. I'm going to be emailing it. Good time to insert this so you can be prepared for the final exam in this class. I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to do it. It's going to be similar to the midterm, which of course for some was easier than for some others, and probably for no one any more difficult than it was for me. So there's that. This is an interesting piece because it is, and I want to talk about, this is George Segal, and there's an actor named George Segal, but that's not to be confused with this George Segal. This George Segal took friends of his and convinced them to be wrapped in plaster gauze and turned into sculpture. I understand it was quite a tedious exercise and hard on the model and so on. And of course, as plaster dries, if you've ever worked with it, it starts to heat up, so quite uncomfortable. At that. Now, this model was a very well-known, successful art dealer, big time, Sidney Janis. And this is Sidney Janis looking at a Wright. Excellent answer. Mondrian. So it's an interesting piece to say the least. However, then there's this one. An artist can, tickle your fancy, he can do many things, and he can also help break your heart. This piece is titled Holocaust, and I think it is incredibly powerful between the bodies and the barbed wire, and the fact that he covers these bodies in white and leaves them. I want to insert here, there have been a couple where he's done bright colors on a couple of figures. So they're mostly white, I'll just say it that way. And this is a very compelling piece of work. It's up there with Raft of the Medusa in terms of its emotional capacity of speaking to us and to our hearts and to our experience in a special way. And of course, this one not so much in terms of the emotional impact. We actually think of George Segal in the pop artist category, so that's where you will find him in most art history books and museums and so on, as well as this artist who has this garden trowel over here on the left-hand side of the photograph. This is Claes Oldenburg, who took everyday household objects and decided that he was going to call them pieces of art and turn them into commanding objects monumentally. This is back to another George Segal piece. It's called The Bus Driver. This, I believe, is at the Whitney Museum in New York City. Although there's kind of a new Whitney thing, I think it's probably still there. It's called The Bus Driver. And yet, here we have this guy driving a bus and it's placed on top of cinder blocks. So this bus is never going anywhere. And I think we have an interesting response to that because of that. Lichtenstein is a pop artist who is inspired by the work of coloring books, and what he does is he blows them up in giant form along with the pattern of the what is the I can't think of the name of the pattern, but anyway, and especially this is a good example of his work. And here we have this guy, Jasper Johns, another pop artist, target with four faces. Jasper Johns, I believe this is an encaustic. Encaustic is a wax with pigment in it, material. It's very fragile. And he also is incredibly famous for this iconic piece called Three Flags. Encaustic also, I'm fairly sure. Again, an everyday object, showing it to us in a context that's different, in a new way, and turning it into a significant piece of art. I'll leave it at that. Pop art is not pop art without this guy. This is one of my favorite artists. People know that about me. Andy Warhol. This is a self-portrait ×9 of Andy. He would take photographs, or someone would take a photograph. He believed that, why touch it yourself if you can get somebody else to touch it? It's a whole thing you have to, and I really, one of the things I'm sorry about in this class is I always show a biographical film about some of these artists that we've gone through very quickly, Andy Warhol being one in particular, because I think enough people don't really get it and don't really understand the thing he was about, and that's unfortunate. He influenced a lot of things, and a lot of other artists, and a lot of other ideas and philosophy. He was quite brilliant, much more so than being a con man. And I would like for all of you, after taking this course, to look into some of these artists that you think, oh, I'd like to know a little bit more about that one. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that. I mean, visit galleries, visit museums, especially the Warhol Museum. We're right here near Pittsburgh. When this whole pandemic is over, get there and enjoy the Warhol Museum. It's a great, great museum. And many people living in Pittsburgh have still not seen it because they think, well, I haven't seen it yet, but I will. And I don't know what year they're going to see it. Now this one is called Gold Marilyn. It's a photograph of Marilyn Monroe that Andy did not take and placed in this, talk about proportions. So the parts of the whole, he's got this large canvas painted gold, that's why it's called the Gold Marilyn, with this little photograph in the center that's been silk screened and painted in these really obnoxious colors, and that's that. And it was famous enough, but then it became more famous when somebody shot it, and it became, because they were so upset by it, they tried to mess it up, but they only made it more valuable. Here's another portrait of Andy, a self-portrait, I should say. He used Polaroid cameras by and large, and here's one thing I want to quickly say about Andy. So here's a kid who was teased, bullied like crazy as a little kid. He was not healthy. His mother was his inspiration. She gave him, because he was in bed a lot and sick, she gave him crayons and coloring books and paper and movie magazines, and it became his whole thing. And he went from being somebody that no one would invite to a birthday party in elementary school. But people like this, Elizabeth Taylor, this is his portrait of Elizabeth Taylor, very famous actress. You can't get more famous than Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor would not plan one of her elegant, gigantic parties without making sure Andy could come. And I just think that is pretty amazing. I think it speaks to people who are really just doing their own thing, true to themselves, and doing it their way. And Andy certainly was one of those. He did a lot of illustrations. In fact, he was a department store at Bloomingdale's, a decorator for a while, and then did a lot of illustrations in magazines. This is one of those. And what I didn't know for a long time is that it was his mother who did all of the writing. She has a very identifiable handwriting, which I always thought was his, but in fact it was his mother's, and she did the handwriting. And I also wasn't aware for a long time, but I've been aware for now, I guess a long time, that Andy would draw with a pen and ink, liquid pen and ink that is, and he would have a napkin and he would blot it. So you see these little like fuzzy lines and so on, very, very typical of his work. That's how that was created, and I did not know that. But we do now. Now you know that. Now this is an interesting painting. These are really giant paintings. They're at the Warhol Gallery. And if you'll notice, it's a skull. It's from a photograph. It's painted very powerfully, sort of an abstract expressionist way. But I'm hoping that what you can see more than the skull is the baby's profile. You see that? Well, I think the first time I saw it gave me sort of chills, and because I'd seen it before and didn't notice the baby. And once you do, and you see that there's a skull and there's an infant, I think, you know, it's an interesting, powerful work of art. And it comes in different colors. You'll know if you see it in the room what I'm talking about in that regard. Of course, nothing more famous than this in terms of making Andy an artist of note in all history books. There probably will never be an art history book created that won't have Andy Warhol's at least one of these soup cans in it, because he took ordinary objects and talk about zeitgeist. You know, canned soup is something that is so that became so of his time, of that time, because women weren't staying at home and making real soup from all these other ingredients and spending lots and lots of hours. You can go to the store and buy a can of it for very little money, and there you have soup in a can. So it's not just a soup can. It has a lot of, I think, meaning behind it in terms of zeitgeist, in terms of the time in which it was painted, in which it was created. You'll see some of his soup cans on 535 in your textbook, and a Lichtenstein on page 833 of the Comic Book Artist, although it's not that same image. Now we're going to take a look at perhaps America's most famous architect. His name is Frank Lloyd Wright. And one of the best parts about knowing anything that Frank Lloyd Wright created is that perhaps, at least for me, his best ever piece is within an hour and a half of here, of Bethany. So while you're here, make sure that you get to see it. So many people who live close by don't get to see this. I believe there was a school trip. They didn't ask me to go, so I didn't go, to Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Waters. Frank Lloyd Wright designed this home for the Kaufman family, and the Kaufman family owned a large and wonderful department store. The big one was in downtown Pittsburgh. Stores really aren't like that much anymore, which is such a shame. It was an amazing thing. Luckily, I was around to shop in there quite a bit. I lived in Pittsburgh for a while after leaving Bethany, and going to the University of Pittsburgh for that matter. Anyway, so he built this amazing home for the Kaufman family, and it is certainly innovative and interesting architecture. He built it over a creek, over some falls, which is why it's called Falling Waters, and it's cantilevered so that it balances in a very interesting way. He was told it couldn't be done, and so he proved that it could, and that's the way a lot of artists have conducted themselves. Here's a wonderful black and white shot of it, from a slightly different angle. And when you're in the home, you hear the rushing water. It depends on, sometimes it's a little scary because it'll be too much. You hear it, and at the same time I want to say that there's an impractical feature about that, which you probably can only imagine, and that is that there's dampness that is a result of such water flowing and rushing right literally through your house. Another angle is shown here. You have to have reservations well in advance in order to go through this. And again, every angle has something spectacular. He not only designed the structure itself from ground to roof, but every single piece of furniture in the house was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. If you'll notice, the floor is natural slate stone, and that in and of itself is interesting. And the heating system is pipes underneath that floor. So in addition to it being ultra modern for its time, to tell me, yeah, 1935, 36, and 37 in those years. So it was extremely modern for its day and time, to say the very least about it. Another shot of the interior. So get to see Frank Lloyd Wright while you're in the neighborhood. You won't regret it. People come from all over the world, by the way, to see it. And then people that live close by sometimes don't take advantage of it. So page 493 in your textbook for Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. I think, let me see. Next, and I think finally, at least finally for today, I'm going to show you some of the work of this architect. Antonio Gaudí, G-A-U-D-I is his name. He's a Catalan architect, which means Barcelona. Catalan doesn't consider itself part of Spain, but actually it's the northern part of that area, geographic area. Antoni Gaudí was, as a little boy, he had a lot of health problems, rheumatism being one of them, so he didn't get to play sports and run around and do all sorts of stuff. But what he did get to do was to draw. And what he liked to draw was nature stuff, over and over again. So he was quite prolific as a young boy, and he knew that what he wanted to do one day was to become an architect. So he did go to architecture school to learn what one needs to, I mean, you can't fool around. You can fool around with painting and drawing and stuff, but you can't fool around with architecture because somebody could die. And you know, that wouldn't be good at all. So he did need to know all kinds of things about physics and all of this. And he, as best I can tell, learned more than just about anybody that I can imagine ever knew. By the way, let me go back and talk about, well, I'm not getting too ahead of myself. All right, this is a balcony of a place called Casa Mila. It's an apartment building. And notice these organic, like iron things that he designed that would hang over these balconies. I was in this apartment building, and it's now open for tourists, so people aren't living in there. You get to go all the way through it. Just last year, shortly after graduation, I'd been there before, but my wife hadn't, and my friend that was traveling with us hadn't, and I was so excited with every one of his structures that we got to go into, not the least of which is this one. This is La Sagrada Familia, which is Catalanian for the Holy Family. It's been being built since 1925. It will be complete in 2026, so that's the goal. It's hard to tell. And when it is complete, it will be, I think the word is the fastest major cathedral ever completed in such a short amount of time, which is mind-boggling in and of itself. Look at these spires. And by the way, and this is an earlier shot of it, I've been there since a lot of work has been done. In fact, a lot of work had been done, and then the Spanish Civil War came along, and a lot of cathedrals and churches were burned and destroyed during Franco's time, and unfortunately, La Sagrada Familia was affected by that, so a lot of it had to be reconstructed. And multiple times, the people of Barcelona gave up on it, saying no more money is going to be given to this project, and then so people would then respond one way or another, and it keeps resurfacing and coming back. And right now, I was so excited to see it in all of its glory when I was last there. It is a sight to behold in every way, shape, or form. You will never, ever be in any place that closely resembles it. And it's so organic. Now this is on top of Casa Mila that we were looking at. The rooftop has all these incredible chimneys, each one different from another. And they like to recycle stuff. So he's had a lot of broken ceramic and pottery and glazed ceramics and plates and stuff, and he would break them up or have them broken up and do these mosaics on these many chimneys. I don't have as good a picture of the chimneys from art store as I have in my bathroom at home that I took. I have to say, well, I can't get enough of Antonio Gaudí, and he's not even in this art history textbook, and something needs to be done about that. But I will tell you that when I first started teaching art history now a long time ago, there wasn't a single woman artist in that art history book. Not Georgia O'Keeffe, not Artemisia Gentileschi, not Sofonisba Anguissola, and on and on and on. So we're making some progress, but we need to get Gaudí in there. One of these editions, it's in the, what did I tell you, 8th, maybe the 9th. Now, he had a benefactor, a Mr. Guell, G-U-E-L-L, a wealthy man, which was fortunate for him. And so he built a home for Guell, and he also built a park adjacent to it. And you can see the mosaic thing I was talking about. And these wonderful giant lizards that he has. He's very whimsical and fanciful. And every corner you turn, there's something new and wonderful to look at and think about. And that is the home right back there. Let's see, do I have any others? That might be it. It's too bad that that's it. But hopefully, one of these days, you will get to all these places and these museums. I am going to also be sending you something that Matt Robinson shared with me, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. I know I did. I didn't have a lot of time and energy to spend with it, but it's a virtual tour of a lot of the major galleries, especially think about touring, not just think about, because I want you to do it. Go to the Uffizi, U-F-F-I-Z-I, that gallery in Florence, Italy, and you'll see Duccio's Madonna Enthroned. I was trying to see what in their collection they're showing you in this virtual tour of the museum, and there's quite a bit of it. Botticelli's Birth of Venus, Primavera. There's a lot of stuff in there. So I would check that one out, and I'm not sure if I saw the Louvre on this one or not, but anyway, check out the Uffizi. And I believe in a couple more days, I'm going to be wrapping this up. I'm going to be sending you, in the interim, a study guide for the final exam. And I'm happy to receive your concerns and your questions about what's ahead and how we're going to handle it and how we're going to do it. This is all new territory for all of us. And maybe because I've been around doing this a different way for a very long time, it might be even harder for me. It's not what I want it to be. It's just what it has to be right now. And I think we can all understand that, of course. But I'm frustrated. I want to be able to share a lot more directly and answer questions when they came up and all that sort of stuff. This doesn't allow itself to do that. So I never signed up to be an online art teacher, and now that I know what it's like and its frustrations, I never would sign up again. So you take care, and we'll be talking again soon. Let me know if you need me. You know where to find me. Ciao.